I see that there are still some people trickling in, so I'll give it a minute or so, but not much more because, of course, we want to start in time in order to be able to end in time. In the meantime, I would like to ask everyone that is not speaking to turn off cameras and, of course, microphones. This is to help our bandwidth and not cause any problems or delays, and also not disturbances, of course. Okay, but I think we can start, and if other people continue to trickle in, then of course they can jump in when they do. My name is Erik Meers. I am from the Ghent University in Belgium, and also coordinating the Nutri2Cycle project. And in frame of that project, we have an exciting series of webinars planned for you. So this is the first out of 3 in which we are focusing on what we call our lighthouse demos. So we have in total about 14 different solutions, as we call them, to optimize the nutrients, so the carbon and the nitrogen and the phosphorus, as well as the carbon cycling in modern agriculture. And I think there is someone who has his microphone still on, so please do turn it off. So today is the first one. We have a series. It's in close proximity. The next one is already on Friday, and then we have the next one next week. So there are in each case different demos to be presented. So it's not as if we are going to repeat ourselves 3 times in a row. These are 14, and today we have planned 5 demos. So then moving on, so the Nutri2Cycle project, for those who are not familiar with our project, it's a Horizon 2020 project, which is going to September 2023. We got a COVID extension of plus 1 year because during COVID we had a lot of issues with delays on, for example, demonstration and interaction with stakeholders. So we are making use of an extra year to make up for that. Let me turn off participants. So people who are joining now, please turn off your mics and cameras when you are joining. Otherwise, we have background noise. So the Nutri2Cycle project, as I was saying, is a European project lasting until, or it will end in September 23. And we are looking at how to optimize the nutrient flows and the carbon flows in modern agriculture. So how can we make agriculture more sustainable, and how can we reconnect nutrient flows between animal and crop production? So what we are doing is benchmarking these flows in the modern agriculture as we see it today, and then propose and test technologies that we think can optimize the flows, so that it means that we have higher nutrient use efficiency between animal production and crop production, but also leading in that reduced losses to the environment. So the topics of today and the next webinars are on the lighthouse demos. So within the project setting, we also want to demonstrate at relevant scale things which we deem are worthy of mentioning, so that we think, well, this will make agriculture more sustainable in Europe. And within our framework, we have a lot of scientific research going on these solutions. So we want to improve the scale of evidence, of technical scientific evidence related to these solutions. One thing worth mentioning, as you can see on this slide, it's not only mentioned crop and animal production. One of the features of the Nutri2Cycle project is that we are convinced that in order to optimize those flows, you also need to take into account a third type of agricultural activity, which is processing. So that is manure processing, but it's also byproduct, animal byproduct processing, and also biogas activities. So that we say, well, if you focus on these agricultural processing activities, then you can optimize the carbon nutrient flows between the main pillar of agriculture being animal production and crop production. So if you can proceed. Well, the Nutri2Cycle project, we had some years already behind us, and you can see in this second graph, this is like a funnel. What we have done in the first step was collect a lot of different solutions, and we have been interacting with other projects as well as operational groups which were working in different countries to see, okay, what are the proposed solutions to optimize nutrient flows, reduce our losses, and make our agriculture more sustainable as from the perspective of nutrients and carbon. And then we have been funneling this down because of course we cannot investigate everything. So in a stepwise procedure, we have been focusing and prioritizing on a more limited set of solutions that we want to investigate deeper, and not only investigate but also demonstrate. And that's where that step 3 comes in, that nice lighthouse, which is the focus of today. So we want to have advancing the loop closure on nutrients, and we do not only want to investigate and build the scientific evidence around that, but we also want to demonstrate it together with front-running farmers and other agro entrepreneurs. So the next slide, please. So, and then for today, my name, as I already mentioned, is Erik Meers from the Ghent University, and we will be looking at 5 demonstration lighthouse demonstrators today. The first one will be on farm scale anaerobic digestion, how AD or anaerobic digestion at farm scale can improve this. Then we will be looking at adapted stable construction, and I will be presenting that partly together with Geert Vermeulen, who is from a stable construction company. Then we will be looking at using a variety of dairy processing residues together with manure to optimize the nutrient flows in crop farming. And then for the fourth one, we will be looking at floating wetland plants. And in this case, it's duckweed as a floating wetland plant, which is protein rich and can provide new source of proteins grown on agro effluents. And similar, but with a different type of protein crop, we will be looking at algae, also grown on effluents. And here there is again some background noise. I'm looking for it in the participant list, but may I ask to turn off mics and cameras when not speaking. So then I'll be moving on to the first one. Yes, and it's my pleasure to introduce Sander van den Driessen from Inagro in Belgium, who will be discussing on farm scale anaerobic digestion. And there he is also turning on his microphone to process agro-residues or pig manure to increase the local nutrient cycling and improve nutrient efficiency. So Sander van den Driessen has graduated in 2016 as a Master of Science in Biochemical Engineering Technology at Ghent University. He has worked at a manure processing company afterwards for 2 years, where he has enjoyed gaining more experience in manure processing. And then since 2018, the end of 2018, he has been working at Inagro, which is a research and advice center for agricultural research and for agriculture in general. So also crop advice and so on in Flanders, Belgium. And Inagro is also a part and partner of the Nutri2Cycle project. And within our own region, Inagro, for example, is also leading the charge on our national task force. So just to understand, in each of the 12 participating member states, we also have national activities working in local languages, interacting closely with local stakeholders and farmers, of course, in their own language and own context. But I'll hand hand the floor now to Sander to lead us through the first demo. Sander, the floor is yours.
Yeah, all right. Thank you very much for the introduction, Eric. I see that the slides are already there, so I don't need to share my screen, I suppose.
Sander, I can just do it
Yeah.
for you.
All right, perfect. All right,
Okay.
Thank you, Martin. So good morning, and thank you again for the introduction. Today I will indeed introduce you into farm-scale anaerobic digestion, which is one of the lighthouse demos of the Nutri2Cycle project. It has the potential to increase local nutrient recycling and at the same time improve the nutrient efficiency. And of course, it also generates renewable energy. Next slide, please. Yes, thank you. So this figure, it was already presented by Eric, but I just want to repeat this because I just want to tell you how this solution fits within the Nutri2Cycle project. So as mentioned already by Eric, an important part of Nutri2Cycle is to close nutrient loops by creating a third pillar in agriculture. This is the agro-processing. And as you can see on this figure, AgroEnergy and anaerobic digestion are a very important aspect of agro-processing. And if you look at farm-scale anaerobic digestion, we can really close nutrient loops on farm level, and we can also generate energy on farm level. So therefore, farm-scale AD is an excellent example of closing nutrient loops at farm level, and therefore this is an excellent lighthouse demo. Next slide, please. Yes. On this picture, you can see the biogas installation of Inagro. The biogas installation at Inagro is a typical continuously steered tank reactor with a power of 31 kilowatts. And the principle of anaerobic digestion, it is in fact very simple. So I will go quickly through it. You have biomass, which is being fed to the reactor, and there a consortium of microorganisms is producing biogas. So the biomass, it can be liquid or solid, and liquid biomass is, for example, cattle slurry, while solid biomass could be, for example, the solid fraction of pig manure or crop residues and so on. So this biomass is then being fed into the reactor, where it stays for a certain period. This period is called the retention time, and during that retention time, a consortium of microorganisms will then convert the biomass into biogas. Next slide. So this biogas consists mainly of methane, about 50 to 75%, but depending on the input material. The rest is mainly carbon dioxide, but there is also a small part that is water vapor and sulfur. And it is really important to remove these two elements as much as possible because they can cause some damage to the engine. So the biogas is then transported to a CHP or a combined heat and power installation. And there is a production of renewable energy in the form of heat and electricity. A part of this renewable energy will be needed by the installation itself. The heat will be needed to reach the desired temperature, and the electricity will be needed for pumping and mixing and so on. But this is only a minor part. It is on average about 10 to 15%. But the rest of the produced energy can be used on farm as renewable energy. And next to the production of biogas, another byproduct of the anaerobic digestion is, of course, also the digestate. And the digestate can be used as a fertilizer on farm, but it can also be further processed into more valuable products. Next. So this was the working principle of anaerobic digestion in general. If you now look at what is farm-scale anaerobic digestion, there is no strict definition of farm-scale AD, but we talk from farm-scale when we digest on-farm biomass into renewable energy. And we also speak of a quantity of less than 5,000 tons biomass that is being fed into the digester per year. And there is also a difference between co-digestion and monodigestion. Monodigestion is the digestion of only one type of biomass, for example, cattle slurry, while during co-digestion, there are several types of biomass that are being digested at the same time. For example, the combination of the solid fraction of pig manure with crop residues. There are several advantages linked to this technology, of which the most important ones are that a farmer can become self-sufficient in terms of heat and electricity, because of course he is producing his own energy. Also, it is known that greenhouse gas emissions are strongly reduced by applying AD on farm, mainly because there are less emissions coming from the manure storage. The digestate is also a great fertilizer because the nitrogen is more mineralized compared to the raw input material. So compared to the cattle slurry, the digestate has more mineralized nitrogen, so the nitrogen is more readily available for the crops. And it is profitable for a lot of farms and animal husbandry, especially nowadays with the high energy prices, which are only increasing for now. It is, the business case is becoming more and more profitable. But of course, it is a very company specific, so you cannot say for that certain type of farm it will be profitable. No, you should look at it at a company specific way, but we can already say that it is profitable for a lot of farms, especially in animal husbandry. Next to the advantages, there are also some small or minor disadvantages, which are some extra administration that is linked to this technology, and which is also a daily follow-up that is necessary. And this daily follow-up is necessary because the process is in fact a living system, because it is a consortium of microorganisms that is doing the work. So if something goes wrong with the technology or within the process, it is important to solve it as fast as possible. But from experience with farmers, we know that it takes on average about 20 minutes a day that you need to invest into the technology. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned before, the digested biomass is called digestate, and this is mostly stored in an external storage tank. And on this table, you see the difference between, on the one hand, cattle slurry, and on the other hand, the digested cattle slurry, so the digestate resulting from the anaerobic digestion of cattle slurry. And what you can clearly see here is that the dry matter and organic matter content and the digestate is about 30% lower compared to the cattle slurry. And another big difference here is the amount of mineralized nitrogen. So you can see that there is more mineralized nitrogen in the digestate compared to the cattle slurry, which means that it is a good fertilizer for example, grassland, because the nitrogen is more readily available. So you can use it directly as a fertilizer, but you can also further process the digestate. If you send it to a biological treatment, you will get clean water, but you can also apply stripping, scrubbing, or membrane filtration on the digestate, and then you get valuable end products that could be a mineral that could replace mineral fertilizers in the future. So with stripping, scrubbing, you get ammonium salts like ammonium nitrate and ammonium sulfate. And with membrane filtration, you get mineral concentrates. And these three products, they have properties that are similar to mineral fertilizers. They are also classified as renewed products, so recovered nitrogen from manure, and therefore they have a high priority to be to replace mineral fertilizers in the future if the legislations should change one day, of course. So the nitrogen is more available, and when we look at the other nutrients like potassium and phosphorus, we see that the nutrient content remains more or less unchanged. Next slide, please. So you may ask yourself the question, why is this an innovative technology? Because anaerobic digestion is already a technology that exists quite a long time. And also, if you look at farm scale AD nowadays in Flanders, we see that there are already quite some installations that are operational on dairy farms. But next to implementing this technology on dairy farms, we also think that there is big potential to further expand this technology to other sectors, like, for example, the pig sector, or on farms where there are a lot of crop residues available. Next slide. So therefore, within another project, which is called Pocket Power, we looked into the potential to further expand this technology in Flanders. And if we look at animal husbandry, we can clearly see that there is a lot of potential to further expand this technology. So as I mentioned before, nowadays it is mostly implemented on dairy farms, but even there is still a lot of potential remaining. But if we look at the pig sector, we see that for 44% of the pig farms, they show some economic potential to implement anaerobic digestion on farm. Of course, not all of these 44% will invest in farm-scale anaerobic digestion, because it is also very important to have an adapted stable construction, but I will come back to that later. And if you look at the potential for crop residues, we see that, yeah, the business case is less positive, and this is mainly due to logistical aspects, because it is very important that the crop residue is available all year around, because the reactor needs to be fed continuously. And with crop residues, this is not always that easy. So therefore, we see that the business case is less profitable. Next. So we know that there is a lot of potential remaining in the pig sector for further expanding this technology. And if we want to expand this technology to the pig sector, it is very important that we feed the manure as fast as possible into the digester, because as you can see on this graph, the biogas potential is rapidly decreasing when the manure is just stored in the manure cellar without doing anything with it. So the upper two lines, the purple one and the green one, they indicate the biogas potential of the solid fraction of pig manure, while the under two lines, so the red one and the blue one, they indicate the biogas potential of pig slurry. There is already a big difference here in the fact that the solids fraction of pig manure has a way higher biogas potential compared to the pig slurry. But in both cases, you can see that the biogas potential is strongly decreasing, and it's going very, very rapid, in fact. So therefore, it is needed to have an adapted stable construction where you can get the manure as fresh as possible out of the stable system. Next slide, please. So we know that it is that there is a lot of economic potential to expand this technology to the pig sector, and we know what we need to do to get the most of the biogas out of it. So therefore, Inagro tested the monodigestion of pig manure in our own biogas installation. And the feed consisted of the combination of pig slurry and Vidose solid manure. So the Vidose is a type of an adapted pig stable system where there is manure separation at the source. I will not go too much into detail on this now, because I think it will be come back into the next presentation. But important to know here is that with the Vidose system, you get solid fraction of pig manure out of the stable, which is also very fresh. So therefore, it has a high biogas potential, which can also be seen on the next slide. So we did a lot of analysis on the different types of inputs that was going into our digester, and we saw that there was an average biogas potential of the Vidose manure of about 110 cube biogas per ton, while for the pig slurry, this was only 25. An important remark here is that the pig slurry was not very fresh, so it was not optimal. If we could have obtained fresh pig slurry, it will be somewhat higher, but even then it will not come. It will not be higher than 40 or 50 cube biogas per ton. Next slide. Yes. But the most important of this test was to look if we were able to get the process stable. So therefore, we tested two retention times of feeding only pig manure into the digester, and we saw that after a couple of days, we got a stable process with a continuously biogas production throughout the entire testing period. We see in the beginning that there was some decrease in biogas production, but this was mainly due to the fact that there was a problem with the hot water circuit. But afterwards, it was quite stable, so we can say that the test was in fact successful. Next slide, please. So if we now look at the future perspective, we can see that stable anaerobic digestion of pig manure is definitely possible, but there are some important points of attention. First of all, it is really important to mix as good as possible, because with mixing you can also prevent some foam formation, and foam formation is a big problem in the monodigestion of pig manure. Furthermore, as I mentioned before, it is really important to get the manure as fresh as possible into the digester. So therefore, an adapted stable construction is necessary. And last, during our test, we noticed that there was still some biogas potential remaining in the digest state. So therefore, it could be interesting to look into the possibilities or opportunities to recirculate a part of the digest state, so that you can valorize all the biogas potential out of the manure. Another future perspective, if you go back to, yes, thank you. Another future perspective is the combination of anaerobic digestion with nutrient recovery, which is becoming more and more important. As I mentioned before, some of the digest state products have the potential to be classified as renewable, and thus they could be a mineral fertilizer in future. So therefore, I think there is a lot of potential to look into the combination of anaerobic digestion and nutrient recovery. And also, I mentioned before that anaerobic digestion is profitable for a lot of farms, but not for all farms, especially for small farms. It's mostly not profitable. But if you then can let's several types of small farms, if they can cooperate, we might get a positive business case as well. Next slide. So this was in a nutshell my presentation or my introduction on farm scale anaerobic digestion. If you should want more information on this, you can always access our video that we produced on this, or you can access our website where you find a lot of additional information. And you can also find 2 brochures on this website, of which one was produced within the framework of the Flemish National Task Force. Next slide. So I would like to thank you for your attention, and if you should have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Thank you.
And thank you. And something that I should have mentioned at the very start as well, but Margarita has posted it in the chat part, is that after each presentation, we are also have a small survey planned, so that it's dedicated for us to learn how transferable this technology, and this will also go for the next presentations, is in your own specific region. So that's something we are eager to know, whether this is only being done in our part of Europe, or whether it is also adaptable as well. I see a question popping up. Can you please put the link? Well, for the survey, that's coming up next. But the link in the presentations, we will share that, so that the links that Sander was referring to, you can also then access. So we will be sharing the presentations afterwards. So these links can then be followed. For the questions, Margarita, I think we also need to go to the questions, or the questioning at the end of all the presentations.
We will have questions and answer session at the end of the presentation.
Okay. So also the electronic questioning is at the end. Okay. So I understood that we were going to discuss the results at the end, but I thought we were going to do them. Okay, but then I stand corrected, or I sit corrected. So that means that at the end of the presentation, hang in there. So do not go away. We also want your opinion and suggestions to know whether these technologies we are presenting are also usable and transferable in your parts of Europe. Okay, the next presentation is one that I will be jointly presenting with Geert Vermeulen, but Geert will be first speaker, and then I will add some knowledge and content from our side. This is
I close it.
This is about adapted stable construction for having source separated collection of solid manure and urine in the housing of animals, and in this case pigs, themselves. So that, but the rationale behind that, of course, I will first invite to the floor. So you maybe Geert, you could turn on your camera as well to introduce the concept. Geert Vermeulen is the CEO of Vermeulen Construction, a company that is dedicated and experienced in agro-technical construction, amongst others, stables for animal husbandry, and with one of those features being the VDOS system, which is a stable construction that we will be highlighting today. But first, Geert will talk a little bit, and then I will also share some research experiences that we have so far. So, but Geert, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Hello, I hope that everybody heard me. So, as Erik already mentioned, my name is Geert Vermeulen from Belgium, from the Flanders part of Belgium. Can I have the first slide? Okay. So, we are from Belgium, Ypres, the town of peace. And our company is already, let us say, around 30 years active in the pig business. What do we do in the pig business? All that is technical part of business of the stable. So that means as ventilation systems, feeding systems, and also the VDOS system, which is the highlight now. Can I have next slide? So I will present the VDOS system. It is already existing here in the Flemish part of Belgium around, I guess, around 12 years. So that means that when we go back in history, let us say that around 50 years ago, we have normal pig stables. So that means that is a full sledge stable with an exhaust fan. And around 15 years ago, we have some laws around emission, especially the ammonia emissions. So next, yes, thank you. So the techniques that generally techniques 12, 15 years ago was that we can construct stables, but it has to be, we have to do something around emissions, especially the ammonia. The major techniques were the air scrubbers. So that's, let's say, this an end of pipe solution. So when around 12 years ago, we have think about a more sustainable system. So that means that we need some innovation. Right? So we have to develop and the application of new stable system for the fatness pigs and the sows. Right? And because the emissions of ammonia is because we have in a normal pit the feces and urine in a mixed pit, so that means that we have an urease reaction with emissions of ammonia. So that means that we have think about a system which keep the both fractions separated. So the feces and the urine have to be separated in the pit. Excuse me. So that means that if we have a perfect separation of feces and urine, that we have theoretically no ammonia emissions. Right? And our vision was also to remove the manure after a few hours, every 2-3 hours, so that we have a fresh manure, like Sander has already explained, which can be an excellent feeding system for digesters. Right? We have also, if we kept those two fractions separated, we have also normally a reduction of odor gases and a lot of other gases like methane, like H2S and other gases that we even don't know. Right? The system has to be sustainable. And so sustainable, that means that We don't like to use a lot of water, and normally no water consumption or extra water consumption. And the manure must be a resource instead of a waste, because in the Flanders part of Belgium we have too much manure, because we have a lot of pigs and other stables. So it has to be a resource instead of a waste. And we like also that the living conditions for the pigs and also the farmer must increase. We like to have better living conditions. Better living conditions, there's also better growth of the animal, is also less of antibiotics, medication, better lungs, and so on. So less of infection pressure must be decreases. And at 15 years ago, there was only law around ammonia, but also the system have to prevent the reduction of the green gas emissions. Next slide. So our vision was not put the pigs on a full sledge, but on only a particle sledge, and the rest of the stable has to be not a sledge but a closed floor, so that means it's also better for animal health. So we have in principle two fractions, a liquid fraction and a solid fraction. Liquid fraction, which is the urine fraction, we can put it on the fields, and the solid fraction was our vision. Is a perfect resource for the digesters. Next slide. So what is the design? The design is you can see a concrete construction, right? So that means that it is on the end of the box we have a concrete construction. It is 1.75 meters with the sledge, and under the sledge we have a concrete floor with in the middle a slope, right? And it have the concrete floor has an inclination of 3% slope. So that means that the facious part of the manure rests on the floor, and the urine fraction is coming to the channel under the concrete construction by the central urine slot in the middle, which is only around 15 millimeters. So that's of course the manure is removed by a mechanical scraper. Let us say when we are in the fatness, when the pigs are 120 kilogram, so the mechanical scraper is turning every 2-3 hours. When you have little pigs on 20 kilogram, it's only 2 times a day. Next slide. So that means if we can put it on the market here in Belgium, it must be recognized by the government. So that means that we have invested in a prototype stable, and it must be sampled by a labo recognized by the government. So that means that ventilation, odor sampling, and the way of odor sampling is olfactometry. And of course, a gas analyzer which measure the ammonia, also the methane, the N2O and carbon dioxide. So if you can see it on the right, there is a bottle next the gas analyzer. That's the urine fraction, and the urine fraction is coming out of the stable relative proper. Clean. Okay, next slide. So that means that in the fatness pigs, we have a reduction of at minimum 60% of ammonia. Methane is at less also 60%, and odor is 75% of reduction. By the fatness pigs, by the sows, we have nearly the same figures, only the odor is 50%. And there I must say, Eric, that we have measured in the south and the reductions of odors until nearly 80%, but the governance is today relatively complicated because in 2008, I guess 2018, the Flanders part of Belgium is a member of the Vera protocol. Right? So that means this stable is not measured following the Vera protocol. Right? The Vera protocol means that you have to measure 4 stables, right? Which is nearly impossible. Cost a lot of money. So that means that the decision of the government was, okay, we accept the 80%, but we're going to reduce it with 2 times 23% of standard deviation. Right? So that means that they call it the principle of safety. Right? So that means that the effective reduction in the south was until 80%, but because the decision of the government with the standard deviation, it is only 50% on the paper. Okay, next slide. So we have that's an analysis of on the left side decafractie, that's the faeces part. So with the dry feeding system, right? It's very important. On a dry feeding system, we have a dry matter with between 25 and 32%. Right? So in the winter, we have 25%, in the summer around 30%. In the fatness pigs, in the south, it's going until 35, 40%. Right? So that's here one of the analyses, right? Dry matter 26%, right? And we have around 12 kilogram of total nitrogen. Right? And the urine fraction, we have only 2% of dry matter, of course, which is of course very interesting here in the Flemish part of Belgium, which is also logical that you don't have phosphorus, and because the phosphorus is naturally in the fecal part of the manure, and only around 3 kilogram of nitrogen. So that means that the urine fraction, and also very interesting is the kalium, potassium, 4 kilograms. So that means that the urine fraction, we can put it on the land for around 50 ton for each hectare. Right? So on that way, we can reduce also the treatment cost of manure. Next slide. Slide which is also very interesting, that it's a little bit like Sander explained it. Right? One of the tests that we have done is the biogas potential between old manure, that's Odemast on the left slide, and fresh manure. Right? So that means that old manure on this is, I think, around 28% of dry matter. So that means that this it's a sample in a manure treatment after separation. Right? So that we have only in old manure around 18 normal cube of biogas with 28% of dry matter, methane 55–60% of methane, the rest is CO2, ammoniac, etc. And so that's manure of around 2 months. And if you have fresh manure after 7 days, right, it's around 90 normal cubes. Right? So that means that fresh manure contains at least 4–5 times more biogas instead of old manure. So that means that for a biogas plant is very important, like Sandra also already explained, that you have really fresh manure. Next slide. So that means that for the fatness pigs, if we have old manure 65 normal cubic per ton dry matter, 100% dry matter. In a fresh manure, the minimum we have is 300. We have tested the minimum was 300, maximum 400. Right? So in the worst case is 300 normal cubic per ton 100 at 100% dry matter. So if you calculate around 6.5 kilowatt per normal cubic of biogas, so that means that each year we have with all manure around 400 kilowatts of energy, and with fresh manure around 2000 kilowatt. So that means also that in a classic pit stable, that the difference between those two figures and a classic full sledged with a normal exhausting fan, that the difference between those two figures is going into the atmosphere. Right? So that's why that our vision, fresh manure, you have put it as soon as possible in a digester. Next slide. So our conclusion, we have already construct a few stables like that, and all the stables that we have construct is linked to a biogas installation. And it's here around the corner. The major is Waterloo, so that means that they have on site also a scrubbing installation for the recuperation of nitrogen into ammonia water. So the conclusion is that we have a reduction of around 60% in ammonia. Right? It is a sustainable system, and we prevent emissions instead of the reduction. And the first thing is the source solution. So we like to preventing the emissions, and low water and energy consumption. We don't need water for the reduction system, and a little bit of energy. Of course, there is also and our vision is that the solid fraction is for a digester, right? Liquid fraction on the fields, right? And we have also a better climate, so that means that it is proven that the lung quality of the pigs on the slaughtery is in a better quality. Right? So we don't need or less medication if there are problems. So the living circumstances are better in that system or a full sledge with a normal pit system. So next sledge. So thank you very much for this explanation. If there are questions, please let me know. Please, Eric.
Yes, and then the next slide, please. Well, yeah, we added some slides also because we are also substantiating this construction and this principle of having source separation by adapting your stable construction. So we do have some additional slides. I will go over them quickly, but we added them to the presentation so that you can have some backup material as well. So one thing, Geert was referring to it because when we were preparing the slides, we saw differences in reductions measured, and then the one that he presented in his table. But as he explained, this is due to a license to operate and administrative reasons that they tracked from how it was measured, out of the safety principle and assume on paper lower reduction numbers than the actual numbers measured. So that's why you will find a difference or differences in results that I will be showing in my slides, as opposed to what Geert has been showing in some of his tables. So the one important thing is that the stable construction or the adapted stable construction has been measured against conventional animal husbandry. And these three parameters are, of course, of quite important. So the odor units are the olfactory. It's what the nose tells you on the experienced nuisances or odors that you have. And when we are comparing traditional pig housing versus the VDOS system, we do see a significant reduction in odor. And that's, of course, because we have the feces separated from the urine, in which in normal situations you have the slurry combined, and having feces together with urine, you have enzymatic breakdown of your ureum into ammonia, and you are creating odorous compounds. Whereas if you keep them separated and store them separately, then you can have odor reduction, which is also measured when comparing stables. The same goes for methane emission reduction and the ammonia emission reduction I mentioned. So these are numbers that were measured on the actual stables. Then moving on. Well, I will not go through all the characteristics in this table. What we have indicated here, which is something that is interesting as background information, is a comparison between the VDOS manure, which is the solid feces fraction, and the VDOS urine on in the third and the last column. And in between, we have conventional pig slurry, as you would have in conventional housing, where they are mixed below the stable. Some points of attention, if you go, for example, to the mineral nitrogen over total nitrogen. So if you scan through the table and read some of these lines, I will not go through all of them, but you do see that pig urine or the VDOS urine has a good ratio of 5.1 mineral nitrogen over 6.1 total nitrogen, meaning that you have better ratios of mineral over total nitrogen in urine as opposed to pig slurry. Now, this is important also from nutrient recovery, and more specifically also what we have come to know over the last few years as renure characteristics. Renure is the term that has been launched by the European Commission, referring to recovered nitrogen from manure. And renure type products are those types of products that the European Commission considers as likely to be able to substitute, replace synthetic chemical nitrogen fertilizers. So, and in that sense, we do see that adapted stable constructions can result in characteristics of your urine product, which has a higher mineral over total nitrogen, thereby a higher plant availability and nutrient use efficiency when using it on crops, and a good replacement value compared to synthetic chemical fertilizer. So that is noteworthy in this table. If you scan down further, I think it's the fourth line from the bottom. You also see the biogas potential, and here it also referred to that. VDOS manure, so the solid feces fraction when collected fresh, compared to what you would have in pig slurry from storage in normal housing, we do see substantially higher biogas potentials, meaning that this type of product is good to go into the digester, produce quite a lot of energy. And this links, of course, again to the first presentation of today, in which Sander also mentioned on-farm anaerobic digestion. So the biogas potential is also high when separating. So that's also noteworthy to highlight here. And then maybe the next slide. So I will not go through all the characteristics. Another one that we wanted to add is part of the mass flow analysis that we are doing. linked to also to life cycle analysis. I will give in a few slides also some insights on that. But we also do mass flow analysis. So for example, if we take one animal placed per year as the unit, and then we have, of course, nitrogen entering the system in the pig feed. And when we look at the videos stable, we have a conversion of 30% intake into the animal leaving, so the meat leaving the system. And then we have the source separation of the feces and the urine. So you have 35% of the nitrogen going into the urine, which is also at high nutrient use efficiency. And then we still have 5% losses, which is, as indicated, substantially less than in conventional stable systems. Then the next slide. Well, this is on the LCA, so but you can already go to the next one. Yes, so we are comparing for the unit one animal place. The top one is the conventional housing, in which we have conventional stable construction with pig slurry storage under the stable. It goes to transport and field application, and we have baseline calculations on losses and efficiency throughout that scenario, that baseline scenario. In a second system, we have an implementation of air washing using chemical scrubbing of the air from the stables, which is reducing then the losses to the environment and creating two streams that are leaving the stables, namely the pig slurry itself, but also ammonium sulfate coming from the air washing of the stables. Both of them are transported and field applied and with reduced emissions compared to conventional stable construction, which has no air washing. And then the third scenario in the LCA comparison is the VDOS housing system, which we have come to explain, in which you have two separate streams leaving the system, the pig urine and the solid fraction, so the feces, the solid fraction going to anaerobic digestion. And at the end, we have again transport and field application. After anaerobic digestion of your feces, you have increased nutrient use efficiency, as Sander explained in the first demonstration on farm scale AD. And the pig urine, as we have come to explain in this presentation, enjoys a higher mineral over total nitrogen. So that is also a good fertilizing product. So those are the scenarios. I have limited to one dimension. We have looked at other environmental impacts as well, such as, for example, terrestrial acidification. But in this one, we focused on the carbon footprinting. So if you look at the baseline scenario and you look at the source separation, so the VDO system and the second scenario, you see that we can have an improvement on the greenhouse gas emissions by more than half reduction. Also, the air scrubbing scenario is positive compared to the baseline scenario. So, but the source separation scenario outperforms both other scenarios. And of course, if you look closely at what the bars are made of, you have things like the auxiliaries, which are the products being used, for example, for the air washing. You have the field application of your final products. You have the potential of synthetic fertilizer replacement. And this is something that I will take up also with our LCA expert who is doing this, because in the source separation scenario, if you go from urine to synthetic chemical fertilizer replacement, there should also be a negative yellow bar, further improving even the carbon footprint as compared to what we have on this slide. Transportation, of course, is taken into account, and then electricity usage for the different constructions. But then moving on, this slide is just a teaser, because we normally had included also the field results, but as we have 5 demos, and most importantly, because we have on Friday the demonstrations related to field experience lined up. So what I wanted to give today was that we also tested the urine fraction, compared it to ammonium nitrate as a synthetic reference. We compared it to pig slurry, compared it to unfertilized control, and then also a control without nitrogen but with full amendment of phosphorus and potassium. We did this in 4 replicates and 4 different blocks, in randomized blocks. Did this on 3 different crops across 3 years, maize, spinach and potatoes, to investigate whether this pig urine is indeed suitable fertilizer, synthetic fertilizer replacement. We of course looked at the soil composition and the nitrogen advice coming from the advice center, in this case in Agro. We looked at different dosages applied. So we looked at optimal, and then -30%, -70%. And most importantly, we also, of course, looked at the results from this. We looked at the agronomic yields. We looked at the nitrogen fertilizer replacement value when comparing to synthetic fertilizer. And afterwards, after harvest, we also looked at residuals of soil nitrate, which were still there after harvest, so in the autumn season, because we consider that everything that's still in nitrate form in the top 90 centimeters of your soil, well, that is prone to being lost to the environment. So we want to have as least as possible residual soil nitrate level after harvest. And then moving on to the next slide. So the conclusion is that the source based technique, you can have a carbon footprint reduced by a factor 2 when compared to end of the pipe techniques such as the air scrubber or conventional stable constructions without such air scrubbers. And we've also experienced that pig urine has the potential to be used as a mineral nitrogen fertilizer, whereas a solid fraction from the VIDO system is a very suitable feedstock for anaerobic digestion with high observed methane potential. Okay, I think that's then probably indeed the last slide on this one, which will have me moving on to the next one swiftly to keep on time, of course. And it's my pleasure to introduce Patrick Forrester from Chigask in Ireland. He is the Senior Research Officer in Soil and Plant Nutrition at Chigask, which is Irish Agriculture and Food Development Authority. Chigask is based at Soils, Environment and Land Use Research Centre in Jonestown Castle in Wexford, Ireland. And he and his team are involved in several national and European projects focused on mineral and bio-based fertilizer improvement and integration into cropping programs. Today, Patrick, who is also partner within the Nutri2Cycle project, will be telling a little bit more about nutrient recycling and crop farming and using a combination of different products in an on-farm demo trial in Ireland. So Patrick, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Eric, and good morning, everyone. You can see my slides okay there, Eric?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, so look, I'm going to give a short whistle-stop tour of one of the elements of work that we're doing within Nutri2Cycle, and that is a demonstration that we're running looking at putting recycled nutrients, including some of the type that you heard about this morning in that, if you like, biorefining or separation pillar, and using these in a crop farm. And we've been working closely with a farmer. This is an on-farm demo experiment, Sylvester Burke in Wicklow. I'd like to acknowledge Ashek and Cahill, who've done a lot of the work with setting this trial up and handling the data and putting together some of the data that I'm going to present today, along with Mark Plunkett and Martin Burke in the advisory service, who are helping us get this information out, along with the crops team, Brendan and Dermot, they're facilitating us with equipment, and Eric and his team. So without further ado, I know that you're joining us from around Europe and maybe further afield. Just a little bit of insight into the arable system in Ireland. So typically it's a plough-based system, so inversion tillage, but there is growing interest in minimum tillage and in no-till systems. And obviously that's going to have implications regarding how nutrients are got into the systems or incorporated, for instance. Some of the main crops that are grown include cereals, beans, maize silage, and beet, typically for animal feed, oilseed and oilseeds. So look, I suppose arable farming in Ireland has become more specialised over the years, and I suppose this is no different than what's happened in many areas of Europe and in the world. So I suppose tillage farmers or arable farmers tend to be more specialised with less animals on the farm, and that limits opportunities that would have been there in the past, where farms typically had a mix of crops and animals. So that's limiting to some extent the opportunities for manure recycling. Although we do have a lot of animals in the country, and I suppose that interlinkage within the landscape is still possible. And I think that arable farmers, more and more, they're recognizing the value of organic manures and also other sources of recycled nutrients. The, I suppose, huge cost increases in fertilizer prices of the conventional mineral or chemical fertilizer, whatever you want to call it, has put that in sharp focus in the present year. But also, I think there's been that ongoing understanding that the soil and the benefit of returning some material that contains carbon back into the soil could have benefits in maintaining soil health. But of course, there are challenges there to implement that, including access or having the cooperation to get access to material. Transporting it tends to be bulkier, and that's why the biorefining aspect of this Nutri2Cycle project is also interesting. Questions around how available are the nutrients that are in the material to the plant, and we're also doing work on that side, but we won't go into that in depth today. And also the spread pattern or characteristics of that material. These are really important factors for farmers. So look at some of the recycled fertilizers that we're using in the demonstration are things like cattle slurry, which are readily available. If you like, that's almost a reference for farmers, but also poultry manure that's been dried down, broiler manure. We're looking at a couple of dairy processing sludges. So these are coming out of the milk processing streams. They tend to be high in phosphorus. And also we looked at some pig slurry solids. And you heard earlier about how those could be really useful in anaerobic digestion as that develops. So perhaps competition for them there on that side. So look, as I mentioned, this is an on-farm demonstration trial. We're really grateful to Sylvester Burke for his cooperation. And I suppose Sylvester has been a farmer that's been, I suppose, really interested in this recycling of nutrients onto his farm over a long period. So he's a good fit to engage with this. So what we did with this demonstration trial is we put it into a particular field where we would go back onto the same footprint repeatedly over years. And I suppose this is what, to see those longer term effects. And in farming, typically farmers return back onto the same footprint over and over again with their practices, albeit with the rotation changing in cropping. So in 2019, Sylvester had maize in the field, so we put in maize for silage. In 2020, this was followed up by spring wheat. And you can see actually here in this aerial picture, the experimental design. So there was 4 blocks or replications. So it was a randomized complete block with 4 replications. And you can see the various treatments there. And we're returning repeatedly onto these. In 2021, it was oilseed rape. And we've continued this in 2022. Currently, there's winter wheat crop present on that site footprint. So some of the objectives that we had were to demonstrate this to farmers and to, I suppose, get some information about this out to farmers and have a place that they could come and see this being done in practice, and also to gather data on how it would perform in the real world in terms of its yield performance. Of course, COVID has restricted access to that, but we hope to do much more of that in the coming year. So look, in the short term, we've been able to measure yield performance, and I consider like several years to be the short term in this sort of work. So we've been able to build up a picture of yield performance over a number of crops. We're starting to look at the economics, and Ashik has pulled together some slides on that, which I'll present shortly. Look at the practicalities of actually using some of these things on farms, and I suppose to familiarize a farmer audience with them. And the site serves for use as extension to bring groups in and talk about these topics. I think one of the value of these type of experiments where you can keep them going is in the longer term. We can look at other effects, such as the effects on soil carbon, which is a slower process to change, and soil biology as the effects of treatments bed in over time. So to take you through some of the results that we've seen in 2019 in the maize crop, if you compare, so we've an unfertilized control as a background check, but if you like this treatment here, the chemical fertilizer second from the bottom is just all bagged conventional NPKs fertilizer. And in the other programs, we displaced some of the chemical fertilizer with either the broiler manure, the cattle slurry, or the dairy sludges, or those pig solids in the following year when they become available. And this helps us to reduce the dependence on the chemical or the mineral fertilizer. And I suppose what we see here is that the yield performance can be sustained while taking this type of approach of using some of the recycled nutrients and complementing them or balancing up to the crop requirement using a chemical fertilizer. But I suppose it's important to have a nutrient management plan and to put this in place and to know what's in the materials, so you're not playing a guessing game. Of course, there is that issue of how available are the nutrients in different materials, and that's something we're also working on. So in this graph that Ashik has put together, at the bottom here you see the 100% using chemical or the conventional bagged mineral fertilizer, the cost there, taking some cost assumptions. Now this is for this particular crop in this particular field based on its underlying nutrient status. So this will differ between crops and as fertilizers changes. But look, the key message here, I suppose, is that there is cost savings to be made there. And that cost saving, in part or in whole, may be taken up by the cost of getting access to and applying the recycled materials. In some cases, such as for the dairy sludges, farmers can actually have this spread on their land at no cost to them, because it may be something that the processor needs to find an outlet for. But this is going to change over time, I suppose. So into 2020, we had a spring wheat crop, and again we see a similar trend here. So comparing to the chemical or mineral fertilizer, those treatments that had the recycled nutrients on also performed well, and typically there was no significant differences here in the yields. And again, there are cost savings to be made comparing to, in this particular case, the nutrient management program had 2 chemical fertilizer treatments, but you see cost savings there to be made. In 2021, again, we built up this picture over time now, where you have something more convincing to talk to a farmer audience about. Keeping this going over time, again, yield is standing up in oilseed rape. And again, there are some cost savings to be made there. And those cost savings are going to be very dependent on what the soil status is. So for example, if you've got a large phosphorus requirement in the soil, then we could potentially be using more of the dairy sludges, which are high in phosphorus, to supply that phosphorus to the plant, and thus achieve greater savings by offsetting more bagged or chemical purchased in phosphorus fertilizer. So look, just to keep things clicking along, indications of the demonstration trials so far are that similar yields have been achieved while displacing some of the chemical or mineral fertilizer. This gives rise to potential cost savings, but look, we're also working on this issue, which is recognized that the chemical or mineral fertilizer replacement values of some of the recycled materials is not well known or described. And we've published papers recently on this for the dairy sludges, for example. the materials do have different spreading characteristics. So this is an issue for farmers and how they're going to put this into their system for individual farmers. And I suppose I see this site as something that we will try and keep going, which allows us to look into longer term effects on soil carbon and the soil biology as the effective treatments beds in over time. And of course, there's more of an interest in this soil carbon and soil health area with the EU Soil Health Mission, etc. So look, if you want to know more about this, the team have put together some nice videos. There's 2 videos on YouTube where you can see more about this specific trial. They're short videos, about 2 minutes each, and they give a little bit of an overview. You can also follow along on Twitter with the hashtag Nutri2Cycle, which should link you to work not only from this demo, but from other demos and on the Nutri2Cycle website. So with that, I'll say thank you. And if there's questions, I'm happy to take them now or at the end, depending on how we're going for time.
Okay, and thank you for the nice presentation. One general practical remark I have for the audience is the filling in of the survey is something you can already do and are advised to already do during the presentations. So the link that Margarita has shared in the chat, click on it and you will find yourself into the survey link. And then you will see that the response is built up in the order of the presentations that have been given so far and that are still coming, so that you can give your geographic opinion, because the survey is specifically looking on whether technologies which we are presenting today are something that are useful, are being used, or are transferable to the context of your own country. So the results will be coming at the end, but the filling in of the survey is something that we do as we go along. So I would like to invite all of you to go to the chat part, look up the link that Margarita has posted there at the start of this webinar, and already start filling in for the innovations that have been presented so far. And then for the next one, the next 2 presentations actually are both looking at how we can get novel sources for protein locally grown. So those are 2, let's say, protein oriented innovations within the Nutri2Cycle project. The first one is going to be presented by Reindert de Vlaming, who is a researcher at Inagro and indeed who has turned on his camera. He has been doing his PhD at Ghent University in conjunction with Inagro. So he is, we like to see him as a liaison between Inagro and Ghent University, focusing specifically on the floating wetlands plants, also known as duckweed in this particular case. And he will guide us through the potential of using these plants as a protein crop when growing on agro effluents, which are nutrient rich. But Reindert, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Eric. Thank you for the introduction, and also for the platform here in this Lighthouse Network webinar. I present you the floating wetland plant grown on liquid agro-residues for a new source of protein, like introduced, and we can go to the next slide so I can give you a short description of the solution. Well, basically, this could be a circular loop within current agriculture, trying to link actually 2 challenges. First of all, the big manure surplus here in Flanders, but also in several regions in Europe. And secondly, the large protein demand of Europe, and in particular the soy protein imports, which are linked with deforestation in North and South America. So linking these 2 challenges with duckweed would theoretically and we are quite sure also practically give a quite good environmental impact. You can see on the right our pilot that's also been maintained in the Nutri2Cycle project. And it gives you a small view of how it could look like. But of course, if we want to have a big impact, we would go towards lagoons of perhaps hectares large or larger even. So what you see is a floating plant, and then also in the hand, in the small schematic loop, you see that it's just a leaf and a root. So it's a very small plant, and that gives it also some advantages. But let's go towards the next slide. So how it actually works, you can tap also 3 times, Maarten, because there are some animations, I believe. So what you have here is, let's say this is the mass balance of our duckweed ponds. So we put agricultural waste streams in it, and in particular, we focus on manure and its derivatives from treatment. So what you do is partly the nitrogen, phosphorus, but also potassium and all other micro and micronutrients can be partly taken up by the plant. There's also a large share of nitrogen and also carbon flows, which can have gaseous removals, for example, in the form of nitrogen gas, by nitrification and denitrification. The clue here is that bacteria that live within normally our storage ponds or in lagoons are more present because they can attach to the duckweed, but they also have a small oxygen increase or availability to improve the nitrification, so increase the nitrogen removal. And then you also have an arrow pointing downwards, and that's the process of sedimentation, especially phosphorus and other less mobile nutrients are sedimented in these lagoons. The key here is that duckweed is actually cultivated in still water, meaning that there's not a lot of turbulence, and meaning that suspended solids and others can easily sedimentate. What you have in the end is a more clearer water, indicated with the light blue. But you can indeed go to the next slide. Maybe critical viewers will say, yeah, but what is the difference with spreading our biological effluent on agricultural lands? Because we both do nutrient recuperation eventually. You take up nitrogen and phosphorus by plants. But there are some differences. If you use a duckweed lagoon, you have a foil covering the soil. So that means you don't have any physical way to have nitrate leaching, which increases the nitrogen use efficiency. Furthermore, if you spread it on agricultural land, you have limits of nitrogen and phosphorus for environmental reasons, and these are legally implied. On the advantage of duckweed, you have actually a nitrogen and phosphorus demand of at least 10 times higher than the biological effluent that can be applied to arable land, meaning that you can also supply that to these ponds without the loss of nitrate leaching. There is also a difference in the growing season. If you look towards, for example, storage of biological effluent, This is needed during winter time because we can only apply biological effluent or other manure types earliest mid-February on grasslands. In disadvantage of duckweed, the growing season only started this or last week. The week before we had, April, it can be sometimes still cold. Then the nutrient need of duckweed is low because it doesn't really start to grow. But from the moment you have decent temperatures and exceeding 8 degrees of water temperature, so that's mostly around April, you can start also applying nutrients. This is later, meaning that if you would only use duckweed as a nutrient recuperation technique, you would have a longer storage time during winter. Of course, that we don't see it as the only way to use nitrogen. So you have a disadvantage later in the season start, but you can apply nitrogen or phosphorus much longer to the duckweed pond because the demand is very continuous, and you can apply nitrogen and phosphorus throughout the whole growing season, and it will use and also remove these elements almost continuously in the same ratio or in the same speeds. And this can last until October. Also in November, with hot days, there can be still growth. However, variabilities between years have learned us that you only have guarantee until October, and then November is tricky, depending on the weather. What I saw also in a lot of other presentations that they did some kind of or had done an economic feasibility or showed some economic numbers. Well, I chose not to use them here, but afterwards I thought maybe it's good to also explain here a bit the difference economically between spreading biological effluent to land and applying it to the duckweed lagoons. And one key element is that if you use biological effluent, a large part of the cost is actually driving towards the land, spreading it there. So the transport costs, but also the labor that is used or needed to go to these lands and applying it. While in a duckweed lagoon, it can be automized, meaning that if you have your storage lagoon or directly your aerobic last treatment step in the treatment in biological treatment, you can pump it directly into the duckweed lagoon, meaning no labor and also no transport. This is a small reduction, of course, of your treatment costs, which is, of course, very interesting here in Flanders, where per cubic meter, a farmer has to pay 3 to 4 euros, or even with high pressures in some regions or some farms can even pay up to 5 euros per cubic meter. Another difference is that for spreading it on arable land, actually you pay per cubic meter, but not per nitrogen applied. While in duckweed lagoons, you treat nitrogen and you are less, or the amount of effluent you apply is not even considerable, or it doesn't have to be taken into account, meaning that if you apply like very large quantities with low amount of nitrogen, then it can still be all treated, while if you would do that with spreading it on arable land, you will have to drive a lot with these low nitrogen sources. So this is a bit economic. It might be the economic value or explain why it could be more economically. But we also have to take into account that spreading on arable land is something that is already there. You don't need to have a foil, so there's no investment cost or very low investment cost, while a duckweed lagoon is a novel, innovative solution. So you also need, every farmer now would need a higher investment cost. So let's go to the other slide. With you have also quite large similarity with, for example, constructed wetlands, where there in both technologies you remove a large nitrogen and phosphorus amount, and you have dischargeable water at the end. But there are some differences. In a constructed wetland, actually, with the reed-based beds, you have a higher efficiency for nitrogen, but we see in this climate a similar or equal phosphorus efficiency. Okay, disadvantage for duckweed, but you have a harvestable and also potential feed source, which you can recuperate within your agricultural system, meaning that you have other environmental benefits. Also, the high protein content of duckweed is a benefit. Let's go to the next slide. If you look then towards algae, because you also do actually a bit the same, is you also have a local protein production. But what is the difference? Well, algae will have, for sure, larger productivities in their best conditions. But we see that duckweed is actually easier to harvest, also to wash, because you have a physical plant that can be separated with, for example, small solids and particles that are in manure-based effluents. We know that biological effluent is also dark, and it still contains a lot of suspended solids, which have no effect on the duckweed because the duckweed grows on top of it. So there's no photosynthetic synthetic reduce because of darker media. Also, the operational and the investment costs are lower. So from a perspective for farmers, we believe that a duckweed lagoon can be a more easily transferable technology. So next slide, please. So if you tap, I think 5 times, you will see some types of, yeah, that's enough, research questions that we have already in the past, also before Nutri2Cycle, that we have addressed. So let's have a small summary of that. So if you are here in Europe and you have our spring, fall, and summer, you will have a productivity of at least 10 tons dry weight per hectare per year with 30 to 35% protein. If we compare that with, for example, soybean, which is a main imported soybean source, there you have 3 tons of dry weight per hectare per year of soybeans that are harvested in, for example, Brazil, and 1/3 is also protein, so resulting in 1 ton protein production per hectare per year. While with duckweed here locally, we can have 3 to almost 4 tons of proteins per hectare per year. So a much higher land efficiency and productivity per hectare. We also treat manure, and like I mentioned before, it is around 10 times as much nitrogen and phosphorus that could be added to one lagoon to meet the nitrogen and phosphorus demand. A large aspect is also because of the bacterial nitrogen removal, which is included in this lagoon. Then if we look at towards the feed value, we see that the amino acid profile is very similar to soybean. What is also there in soybean and in almost all protein sources from vegetables or from plant from plants is that cysteine and methine, which are sulfur-binding amino acids, are more lacking. But overall, we see similarities with soybeans, so it's an overall good profile, amino acid profile. We also look towards feed safety, and that I will address in the next slide. And I also showed a little bit of the economic feasibility already. And let's say in some cases here in Flanders, we can already say it would be possible to have an economic feasibility. Of course, this is a desk study, and we would to say, like, before we claim it, we also want to have some other or at least on the pilot scale, shown that it can be performed for over years, and indeed these that we have included more research before on a larger scale. So this upscaling is also important, also the automatization, before we can actually say for sure every farmer start with it because it's economically feasible. But the desk study shows a lot of potential. Next slide, please. So what we did is we grew duckweed on biological effluent in quite a large concentration, and did it for over time. And we looked towards the potential toxic heavy metals, which are also mentioned in feed directive of the European Commission. And we compared it with legal limits. And what we see is over time that we don't see an accumulation because you grow your duckweed continuously on, for example, on the same medium, which is continuously also added with biological effluent. So you treat and you add to have a neutral nitrogen phosphorus balance. Even a depletion in cadmium and lead, which is very positive, giving us more certainty that over time, for example, over years, you don't have an accumulation of these elements within your growing medium or within your duckweed. And yeah, the good news is also that we did not exceed any limits. The limits are presented below under each bar, but I didn't show them in each graph because it would make the concentrations of, for example, arsenic and cadmium very low, meaning that it would give less sense to also add a bar and then reduce the differences between times of measuring. So let's go to the next slide, because next to harmful elements, there can also be useful elements like manganese, zinc, and iron, which are even sometimes supplied in pig and other feeds because of their nutritional and beneficial factors. For example, also their again, as an antibiotic antibiotic in feed. What do we see sometimes, or what do we see if we analyze the duckweed? That these elements are much larger or much more present in the duckweed, and also compared to, for example, all other feed materials, meaning that if you would add a little bit of duckweed, we would increase very largely these elements, and meaning that it could also be a type of micronutrient biofortification, giving it an extra value. Also meaning that we might be not be too generous with adding duckweed, because at the end it might also, there are also limits of the amount that you can add to feed. A big question here is, this is in plant material available, but how available is it for the animal itself? So we want to verify this also with bioavailability tests in the future. So let's go to the next slide. There are some future perspectives. A lot of questions, or maybe let's start with a lot of research here done is in integration with other research, and it starts from a base of things that are already been done. While here in this innovative approach, we first start with how does it work and how could we implement it, but there's not enough knowledge on how different pre-treatment steps can be used to optimize even the implementation. And so we need to address also the integration with other wastewater treatments, like, for example, adding an extra reed bed or doing a sand filter before we use the biological effluent, or other questions that will come up with upscaling, like automatization. How does it harvest easily? So that are things that we sure are focusing on in the today and in the near future. What we also want to know is if there can be also emissions within these systems, similarly to, for example, storage of manure. Then you also can have methane or ammonium or NOx emissions. So these need to be taken into account. How big are they? It's still a big question mark. And that will be integrated in life cycle analysis, which is actually already being performed today. And we are with Miriam Beyers from Copenhagen University in this phase of doing the life cycle analysis. The importance of this would be that if we can easily, or if we can claim like, okay, this is, for example, the carbon footprint that you can reduce by doing this nutrient recirculation technique, then this technology can be also, can be supported, for example, from the governments that say like, we want to support nutrient recycling, so it performs very well, so let's give subsidies or investment support, which might make it more feasible for implementation. And then I also said about the minerals are present, but how available are they? And these feeding trials is still we want to perform them as well in a high technology scenario, but that is not for the Nutri2Cycle project, but that's for future perspectives within other projects. Let's go to conclusion quickly. So that's the next slide. Martin, yeah, well, I think the main conclusions is that we take up nitrogen, phosphorus, and recuperate it into proteins, and that it can be feed safe, but there's still research to be done. So thank you for your attention. There's also normally an email in the last slide, so these will be shared, I believe. So for further questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the nice presentation. Before moving on to the very last presentation, I would like to reiterate my call for the participants to also check out the survey link that Margarita has shared. So as indicated, we want to know how transferable or how usable the presented solutions are in your respective regions. So that is something we are very eager to learn, which of the solutions are adaptable, not adaptable, transferable on a short or mid-term perspective. So we will give the first indications at the end during the Q&A session. So we are gathering the information as we speak. But for that, of course, we are counting on you to fill in the survey so that your results are also incorporated in those results. And afterwards, we will process these data together with the other webinars so that we can look at also geographic spread of the transferability. So, but the first hints or the first tip we will share already today during the Q&A. But moving on to the last solution, Marcela Fernandez de Souza from Brazil, but working at Ghent University as our postdoc, working on algae, but she has a broader interest in bioprocesses, biomass valorization and resource recovery. She has a PhD in technology of chemical and biochemical processes. And today she will be telling us a little bit about the possibility of microalgae grown on liquid agro-residues as a new source of protein. So where we had the duckweed as a floating wetland plant that can act as a protein source, we can also look at algal technology. Marcela, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Eric, for the nice introduction. And so now I will advocate in favor of algae, as Reindert said there were disadvantages. Indeed, there are, and I will show you how we are dealing with them in our pilot facility. So yeah, I'll be introducing algae grown on liquid agro-residues as a new source of proteins. Next slide, please. So yeah, very quickly, you have heard this for the last hour and so. Yeah, we are in a very nutrient-intense region. This means that the current status, as we have a lot of nutrient coming into the Northwest Europe, basically this region where we are, and then it goes because we have a lot of agriculture and animal husbandry. We have a lot of nutrient also being produced as manure and other residues. Especially, I want to highlight the amount of soy meal that is important. Reindert also focused on that. So for feeding these animals, we do need to take protein from outside the EU and put it in it. And as now we have a linear situation, we actually want to close the loop and make a circular solution. And we think algae can be a way to do this. So next slide. Specifically as a soy replacement, microalgae are very interesting because they have a high protein content, so between 30 and 50%. It can even go higher depending on the species used and the cultivation conditions. But most important is it has a balanced amino acid composition. So this is the main reason why it's difficult to find crops to substitute soy, because soy has certain essential amino acids that are needed for certain animals, and algae, depending on the species you choose, can supply these amino acids. A good positive point for algae is that they don't need arable land because they grow in water, so it's similar to duckweed. You have ponds or bioreactors, and also right now commercial production of algae usually relies on mineral fertilizer. However, what we are proposing is using recycling nutrients, so no need for mineral fertilizer. Yeah, next one. So just quickly, our pilot facility is focusing on using digestate as a nutrient source for algae cultivation. And as Sander already mentioned, this is mainly because during the digestion process, all the nutrients go to mineralized form, so they're more bioavailable. If you use the organic sources like food waste or animal slurry, as it is, the nutrients are not very bioavailable. It's also very rich in carbon, so if you put this in an algae reactor, very likely you will get contamination because the algae will not be able to thrive so much in this environment, and then you will have a bad process. But when we put this into an anaerobic digestion process, not only you have bioenergy production, which is a great plus for the solution as well, because this can be used for powering, for instance, the algae reactor, but you also get this mineralization of the nutrients, and then they're in a much more available form for algae to use. So next slide. However, as Reindert mentioned, these agro-liquid residues are often very dark. So we do need a pre-treatment step to make them sustainable to make them suitable for algae cultivation. So I will be explaining this in a short minute. Once digestate is pre-treated, we feed it into our algae cultivation system. And then we also have a solution for harvesting. As Reinhard also mentioned, this is a tricky part of algae cultivation, but I will also explain the new developments in this area. So yeah, our lighthouse demo for algae cultivation in agro-liquid residues is mainly composed of these 3 steps. These are housed within a greenhouse. This also solves a little the problem with the growing season, because if we focus on Belgium and these northern countries, the temperatures are not so good for algae cultivation throughout most of the year. But if you put the system within a greenhouse, then you get a much longer growing season with adequate temperatures for getting a good productivity. And our algae lighthouse demo is hosted by InnoLab. So they are an AT consultancy company and research facility at Oostkamp in Belgium. So yeah, now I'll explain each of these steps, more or less how we do it. So next slide. Yes, thank you. So yes, as I mentioned, digestate has a very dark color. You can see in the picture, even when it's only at 20% concentration, is already very dark, and it will hinder light penetration, and algae are photosynthetic organisms, so they do need a good light penetration to be able to multiply. So we have a pretreatment train. We start with a dilution with tap water, about 3 times dilution. This makes the passing through our filtration system much easier, and it will reduce also the ammonia concentrations in the digestate. So we use a coarse filtration. It's a bag filter, as you can see in the picture, with a 10 micrometer pore size. This doesn't sterilize the digestate, but we have seen that the bacteria coming from the digestate are actually helping the algae to thrive. They're most likely making the nutrients even more bioavailable during the algae cultivation step. So this filtration reduces the dry matter content and mainly removes the big particles, which will also make it difficult for light to penetrate in the system, and would also be a mean where the algae could just stick and reduce mass transfer. So we want to remove these. And we have a final dilution step, because mainly the ammonia concentration is still quite high after filtration, and this is very toxic to the algae. So we do need to reach about 100 to 200 milligrams per liter of ammonia nitrogen to make the medium not toxic to our algae cells. Okay, once we have the digestate pretreated, we can go to the algae system. So next slide, please. What we do is we do fed batch, again, to reduce ammonia cultivation. So in the graph here, you can see the 3 arrows. These were the moments when we fed the digestate to the system. In total, we fed 3.5% digestate, which gave around 100 milligrams per liter of ammonia nitrogen in the system. You can see that the algae grow pretty well. They have a quasi-exponential growth. And in about 7 days, we already reach our maximum concentration, which is between 1.5 and 2 grams per liter, depending on the size of the inoculum. Usually we give 10 times lower than we aim to harvest. So we would give an inoculum of about 0.15 to 0.2 grams per liter. 7 days later, we can harvest 1.5 to 2 grams per liter of algae biomass. Next slide, please. And finally, for the harvesting, we have a state-of-the-art harvesting unit. It's a vibrating membrane system, which means that you have reduced fouling. So this is one of the biggest problems when using membranes for algae harvesting. It just, the concentration increases, then you have biofouling. Also, it comes with, algae come with a lot of biofilm. They have sometimes exopolysaccharides that they produce in the medium. So it can be a tricky medium to filtrate. But this company, Licoflux, is proposing a new vibrating system that really reduces fouling. And we have good results with this. You can see in the picture, we have the culture, which is between 1.5 to 2 grams per liter. After it passes through this harvesting system, we have a concentrate with about 40 grams per liter and a filtrate which is completely free of bacteria. And you can see it's quite clear. It also has reduced nitrogen and phosphorus concentrations because the algae uptakes it during growth. So this filtrate can actually be discharged, so it is of dischargeable levels according to legislation. But another option that we still need to research, so this would be a future perspective, is to recirculate this into our reactor, because as I mentioned, we have to dilute the digestate quite a lot to allow algae to grow in it. And this gives a quite high water footprint. So if we want to reduce this, one way is to just recirculate this filtrate. And it seems it should be okay because the filtrate is really clear and with a low nutrient level. So it should be a good, of good quality to be fed into the reactor again. But yeah, this is for future perspectives. Hopefully we will have these results in the early future. So yeah, very quickly, this is our algae system. If you have any questions, yeah, please ask them, and I'm also available for communication afterwards. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Marcella. So this was the last of the 5 presenters. Now we go into the Q&A section. I would invite people to fill in the remaining questions of the survey or start the survey if you have not done so at this point. We will have some time for questions from the audience, so maybe it would also be interesting for the people who are presenting today to turn on their cameras. And after the first Q&A, we will be showing and going over the results of the survey that you are diligently filling in. Let me take a look. Well, there was already a question for Reindert, which he filled in also in the chat, but we will come back on that. There are 2 questions by Zoltan from Soltup in Hungary. One question was linked to Vermeulen, but maybe Zoltan, you could turn on your camera and ask your question personally rather than me reading it. So Zoltan, if you can.
Yes.
Yes, there you are. Hi.
Sorry, but I, meantime, I tried to fill in the question and I missed the line. So, and hello everybody, and nice to meet you again, at least by an online meeting. The question I wrote it down to Vermeulen is linked with actually with the carbon footprinting of different scenarios. And if you, the others were that what is the cost and benefit analysis and the other topics which I wrote it down in the chat. So if it's possible, I need to look it because I forgot it, the main questions. So the question was...
Let me remind you that there were 2 questions. There was one for Vermeulen construct on the stable constructions, and there was also one for Reindert. The one with Reindert he answered in the chat, but maybe you could focus on the one for the separated collection and the stable construction, the adapted stable construction. So the questions for Vermeulen, there were 4-fold. Are they using in the stable any chemical spraying or microbiology products for ammonia reduction? Well, I don't think so here. I don't think they are spraying anything.
Now, no. But it is a very interesting remark because there is at the end of this year, normally we have new regulations about ammonia reduction, which demanding a higher higher reduction of ammonia. So we have done a few tests with effective microorganism, which is producing it's a micro lactobacillus, right?
Yes.
So that means that on the sledge and on the floor where we have the fecalin, that we have a lower pH, right? So that means there is a potential higher reduction of ammonia possible. Now at the end of this year, we have programmed test and official measurement with those effective microorganisms to increase a higher reduction of ammonia.
Yes, thank you.
And it's also better for the health of the pigs.
Yeah.
Then rotating through the other questions that Zoltan had about the construction. If the liquid fraction transport to the fields is costly, well, it will depend, of course, on region and how far you need to go. But in essence, it's the same as your pig slurry being used, but enjoying a higher nutrient use efficiency. But correct me if I'm wrong here, if there is a price deviation between pig urine and pig slurry. But I would assume that on general terms, the cost for spreading would be the same, but that you enjoy a higher nutrient use efficiency. And adding to that, in nutrient pressure regions, you normally have a negative value of pig manure. It's animal manure, you are an excess region. Whereas if you could replace synthetic fertilizer, that would be a positive value. So apart from the transport itself, which I would assume is more or less similar, the value of spreading urine as a synthetic fertilizer replacement, well, that's a positive value, whereas spreading pig manure in a manure pressure region, linked with all the restrictions of the nitrates directive, you will have negative value. So there is that gain to be made. But here you can jump in, of course, if you disagree.
No.
Okay.
Correct.
Then on the third question, on Zoltan, towards you, is the liquid fraction solubilized with water or treated in other way before using it on field? I don't think so. I think the liquid fraction is going, the urine fraction is going as is. And as it is, it's the same like if you would be using liquid fraction after separation mechanically of pig slurry, or using pig slurry in a liquid form itself. So there is no water being added there. And on the last question you had, are you measuring carbon footprint of the pig production itself? Well, there is one of our PhDs, Rahul Ravi, who is doing the LCA, has been using the measurement campaigns also provided by Vermeulen Construct, as well as some additional parameters that have been analyzed and assessed. And assumptions that can be found in agricultural databases towards LCA. So, and we are indeed comparing those three scenarios that I briefly touched in the slides. So you have the normal production, as it were, conventional, yes, without air cleaning, end of the pipe air washing of stable, and then the VDOS system. Let me see if there are. Okay. There is a question from Ashek for Sander regarding small-scale digestion. Could you please discuss some economic aspects of the system? For example, a D-reactor cost of the 31 kilowatt capacity or similar payback, and how much energy produced in average per day. That's a mouthful. I'm not sure whether you have that information ready at heart, but yeah, I'll give the floor to you. You're muted, Sander. You are still muted. I think Sander is experiencing problems. Oei. But maybe then type it if you are experiencing trouble with the sound. Type the response in the chat. But well, from my end, I do know that we do have both economic results as energy production results for this system, as well as other farm scale AD plans. A 31 capacity demonstration reactor at Inagro is, of course, it's a demo plant, but we do have in Flanders throughout the farms here quite a lot at dairy farms, but also now at several pig producers, we have integrated AD systems. And we also have on some other types of activities, such as an onion farm also has an integrated AD processing his onion waste and so on. So those data we do have available also, and not only from within Nutri2Cycle, but also from past experiences with this type of technology.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes. I'm sorry for the inconvenience, but I had some problems with my laptop, so I joined with my smartphone now. So to answer your question, Ashik, thank you first of all for the question. But it's really difficult to stick a number to these questions, since it is very company specific. If you talk about electric power of 31 kilowatts, then you will produce indeed a certain number of biogas per year, but it's also dependent on the input stream. Like, for example, I don't know what Eric exactly mentioned during the last minute, but it's dependent on what biomass is going in, and then every type of biomass has its own biogas potential. So what is going to be produced is depending on that, of course. And also, I don't know what was the other question.
Well, it was energy and economic performance.
So economic performance is also strongly dependent on the energy prices. Like for the moment, the energy prices are really, really high. So the payback time will be very low. It will be very profitable on several types of farms because the energy prices are really high for the moment. If the energy prices are lower, then the profitability will be somewhat. It will decrease somewhat, but it's dependent on several factors, and you should always look into the profitability per company. So it's very, very important to check this company specific.
And maybe on that note, it's indeed it's the energy profile of the farm and the energy intensity that is determining the economy of the implementation. You can see it a little bit like this. You have indeed the rising energy prices, but when you are using energy from the grid, the costs are quite high compared than when you are producing it yourself. This also is at the basis of having economic feasibility at lower scale, because normally the rationale is economy of scale. The bigger you go, the more profitable and technology would be. But in this case, you have a kind of a tipping point that if you dimension your integrated anaerobic digestion based on the wastes that you have locally, as well as dimensioning it against your own energy requirements, then you have a tipping point when it becomes again quite economically interesting. So that is maybe a little bit counterintuitive to go to farm scale anaerobic digestions as opposed to more centralized, bigger biogas plants. But that is something that is noteworthy from economic perspective. I'm wondering, Margarita, whether you have been able to collect some of the results at this stage. Or whether you are still out there. Is Margarita? Yes. But as indicated, the results will be combined with the similar survey that we will be doing on the next webinars, the next two webinars that we have planned on Friday and next week. And then we will also, in the final report, which will be towards the end of June, that we want to have, we want to break it down more geographically. But for the purposes of today, we are going to the per proposed solution to look at a short and midterm feasibility that you have scored between 0 and 100. And those who have not finished yet, feel free to continue afterwards as well. We will share the presentations, the videos, and you can still fill in. So it's not lost if you have not managed to fill it in fully. So we will then include your results as they come available. I'm not sure. Yes, there's the screen. I will have to touch the screen. Okay. So on the farm scale digestion, we do see that, farm scale digestion is something that is quite common in our region, but that's something that we have indeed seen that throughout Europe, it's not so widespread to integrate anaerobic digestion really at the level of the farm. So we therefore see that that the transferability in a score from 1 to 100, from 0 to 100, it's only 54% on the short term, but we do see a higher appreciation towards 74 on the medium term. So that is promising. We see something similar and even more pronounced towards the short-term transferability of the adapted stable construction being below 50. But then at the medium term, we see a higher, although there it is a little bit conservative, that a score of 63. So I think that is something that will need to mature and that will gradually grow. I also think this will depend whether you are in an intensive animal production region or not. I can imagine that that in more extensive farming regions in Europe, this might be less suitable and other solutions might be preferred. So I think that's what I, at a glance, would read into those results. And then maybe for the next slide, yes. So the using a variety of residues in manure is something that can be already be used more. So we have 62 on the short term and 75 on the medium term. So that seems promising as well. And then the floating wetlands, I do think there's something wrong with the dashboard indicator because 35 should be way less, but let's fix those cosmetic dashboard indications afterwards. But the 35 is indicating that the short-term applicability for floating wetlands appears to be low. And on the medium term, well, we are nearly touching 50, so meaning that also on the medium term it is it is again higher than the short term, thank God, but it is low, which means it is probably will take some time to spread this throughout Europe. And then on the final one, on the algae, that's the next slide. Therefore also low, and I think it's quite similar to the duckweed. So roughly around 35 on the short term and just below 50 on the medium term. So growing alternative protein sources on nutrient-rich effluents, either from floating wetlands such as duckweed or algae. Well, it is limited and restricted to certain regions of Europe, and we are keen to investigate further which countries have indicated high and which have indicated low on this. So that's data that we will be continuing to gather, and then we are pushing towards a report on transferability of all proposed solutions towards June. So this series of webinars is greatly helping in that. So thank you for joining indeed, but do not miss our second webinar. As I've indicated at the start of this webinar, the second and third webinar that we have planned in this series are all about other solutions. So it's not a repetition of today. We will be addressing other proposed solutions. And on Friday, again, you can tune in at 10 o'clock, and we will be looking at fertilizer use or bio-based alternatives for synthetic chemical fertilizers, amongst others. So thank you for joining. Thank you for filling in the survey. And this is our list of partners that has in the Nutri2Cycle project. So thank you, and let's hope that we can see all, if not most, of you on Friday for the next webinar. Bye-bye.